thank y'all all for coming. I'll block it. Turned out to be a nice day. Not too hot, not too cold. You know, it's been kind of warm the last few days. We talk about winter fragrance. A lot of times, you know, there are a couple of the old standbys on the list, but I tried to move away from a lot of kind of the real typical things like Daphnes, things like that for this talk, and talk a little bit more about some of the fragrant foliage on some of the evergreen shrubs and southern shrubs. So we're going to talk about some Mediterranean type plants, that kind of thing, because I think that is nice. A lot of those herb type smells are very kind of warm, and it's kind of nice in the house. You bring it inside and have that fragrance during the winter is kind of nice. Before I get started, I want to mention our new t-shirts, our 2013 t-shirts are here just in time for gift giving seasons. So there's a couple of them. There's the short sleeve one, and there's a sweatshirt, but you can see the design. It's the Japanese maple from the White Garden. There are a few more colors and long sleeves and different things. So there's about four different ones, 4 colors. The one that I really want, I was too late for. It's already sold out, but we could be getting more in today or tomorrow, sometime soon. But so they've been very popular already. So, and we do have some of the older ones too. But I do want to throw that out since y'all are here. It's a. Don't have any older ones. No. Wow.
Yeah.
Never mind. So keep that in mind. It's
Ted's willing to sell his.
$35. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and. I do want to say, as always, for those of you who are have not been on the tours before, always would like to get input from people. If you agree, if you disagree with what I'm saying, please add to the discussion, because you know gardeners always have different experiences where you go. So I'm going to give you kind of my personal experience and our experiences here at the Arboretum, but there's plenty of other people who have some great experience here. All right, let's get on out. All right, the first one, Leptospermum Manutifolium, and that's this kind of a sprawling plant here, which we planted back in this corner because we weren't sure if it was going to be hardy, but it has proven to be hardy. We've got it planted out in the open. We thought it was just leaning because it was up next to the building, but we've actually found that really this is kind of how it grows, is kind of as this low sprawling shrub. This is one of those plants from down under New Zealand, I believe. It's a kind of a, like you see, kind of a loose sprawling shrub, about 6 foot by 6 foot if it's grown out in the open. We're thinking about trying to stake it up a little bit and get a little more height in this corner. Excuse me. Very small leaves, Manutifolium, small leaf. It's got white flowers, small white flowers, and then little seed pods, little dry seed pods. There are a few seed pods on there. If it flowers heavily and fruits heavily, they can both be pretty showy. In the amount of flowering that we've gotten, not very showy yet, and the seed pods aren't showy. But sometimes you see Leptospermum seed pods in cut flower arrangements. I think of plants like this as wanting, lots of sun. I've been told, we haven't grown this in the shade, but I've been told that this will grow in deep shade. I don't know. It's going to be a little bit marginal here. It has proven hardy for us, but we haven't had a real good winter since it's been in the ground, and this one's pretty protected. So I think if we had a real Zone 7 winter out in the open, we may lose this plant, or at least it would get some pretty good damage. But so far, it's been very, very good for us. I put on the fragrant list because if you smell that foliage, it really is kind of fragrant. I think this would be a nice plant. Leptospermums tend to hold their leaves pretty well. I can't say for this one for sure, but I would think you could cut it and bring it inside and either put it in some water or have it dry, make a wreath out of it, make a swag out of it, something like that, and you get that fragrance. You get that a lot of times. Plants that have T in their common names are often fragrant plants. Questions about Leptospermum Manutifolium?
If you stake it up, so what kind of habit? Is it still going to be kind of rangy and weepy?
Probably. We're not sure. You know, this
Mark,
is.
repeat the question, please.
Oh, if we stake this up, is it still going to be kind of rangy and weepy? I would think so. Without some pruning, I don't think you're going to get a tidy shape out of this plant without some pretty significant pruning. But I think it's kind of nice, you know, if you have it where other things can weave through it and pop up around it. I kind of like it.
How big are the seed pods? You said they were big.
You did?
If I said they were big, I did not mean to. They're the seed pods. They're small, but you can get, when you have heavy flowering and heavy fruit pot set, you can get a lot of these seed pods down the stem, and they're kind of interesting in dry and cut flower arrangements. This is a little subshrub in the aster family. Subshrub is one of those phrases we use, and I'll call several things this. A lot of Mediterranean plants are subshrubs, where they're kind of herbaceous. We use them a lot like a herbaceous plant, but they've got a woody base at least to them. And you can see if you look down in the interior, very woody down on the inside. Chrysactinia mexicana comes from the southwest of Mexico. Makes a nice little, about 18-inch tall by 24 more inch wide plant. It does seed around if it's happy. This was really just one planting here, and has moved on down a bit and was weaving through other things. We kind of like it because it is such a nice showy plant. You know, nice small leaves, which are well adapted for drought conditions. It is a desert type plant, so it's got these very small leaves, doesn't lose a lot of water, and then it's topped by yellow flowers, and you can see one or two little last hangers on flowers in there, and all the seed heads. It flowers profusely. It just covers itself in little gold daisies. Very nice. If you can, most of y'all can probably reach it. If you smell it, it's got a very, very strong aromatic fragrance. I like it. I guess it could be one of those fragrances other people don't like a whole lot. I didn't say this at the beginning. Those of you who know me know I have a terrible, terrible sense of smell. So sometimes things that are very strong are really nice to me because I can actually smell them. And sometimes when things have a little bit lighter fragrance, I have to rely on the fact that other people have told me that they are fragrant. There is that. This really needs conditions like we have it growing in. It needs well-drained soil, full sun to really perform well. You can grow it over the summer in a soil that in a richer, slightly less well-drained soil. However, the problem you get is it gets loose and lax and opens up, and you get the woody stems and it flops, and it's just not a very effective plant that way, and it won't be long-lived. A couple pieces passing around for those of you who wanted to. I don't know, what's the consensus? Does it smell terrible? Does it smell good? I like it. I really like it a lot.
Can you sow it in seeds?
Oh yeah. If y'all want to grab a couple seeds, go ahead. We don't say that about everything, but you're welcome to grab a couple seeds, and we don't need any more. Other questions?
What'd you
Thoughts?
say about pruning this?
I didn't.
Can you cut it?
Questions about pruning it. Like a lot of plants like this, you don't want to go back too hard. What you can do is, and it's difficult because it's flowering all the time, what you want to do is, after a really good flush of flowers, when it'll kind of cycle on off, is if you want to cut it, just shear it over after that. Right now you could, I wouldn't shear it over. A lot of these Mediterranean type plants don't really like to be pruned during the winter. They just tend not to last through the winters as well. But in the spring, just go ahead and you could do the same thing. Just give it kind of a light shear if you wanted to, and that would help keep them a little more uniform. Other questions?
Do they make anything out of this? I mean, I'm thinking like soap. I mean, the scent.
Yeah. The question was, do they make anything out of it? And I don't know. You know, a lot of times, a lot of these, like the true Mediterranean plants from Europe have been used, you know, they've just, over the years, they have more uses for them. My guess is this could be used, but I don't know if it has been. Okay, next one on the list is Prunus incisa. And this is one that has been unnamed here. We're not sure. Doesn't quite look like the species, but we don't know what exactly what selection it is. There are quite a few of these Japanese selections of Prunus incisa, or Mount Fuji cherry. Mount Fuji, this grows, as the name implies, up in on the main island of Japan, on Mount Fuji. And it's kind of nice to get this early flowering cherry that's a little bit smaller than most of the tree flowering cherry. It really is a shrub, is how it grows. We've got several of them here at the Arboretum, several different ones. Kojo no Mai has a little bit of contorted branches with some weeping ones, some other ones, but all of them are very nice. They flower in the dead of winter. This is a little bit early. Some of these early flowering trees have come out a little bit early, but it would normally be starting now and carrying on into the new year. Now it's just, you know, just about in full flower. But if you look closely, you can still see a ton of flower buds that are still held pretty tight. So it's going to flower over a pretty long period, which is very nice. It can form little cherries. The birds eat them. I always get the question, are they edible? Every time I talk about it, if I mention cherry, people ask, does it have edible cherries? You could probably scrape a little bit of skin off the seed, but that's about it. It'd probably be pretty tart. I've never tried it, but that would be my guess. It's a bit nondescript during the summer. It's kind of nice. It has a nice serrated leaf edge. That's where it gets the name incisa, Prunus incisa. It's incised. But it's a little nondescript. It's great for kind of a shrub border, you know, a spot that will be nice when it's highlighted during the winter, preferably somewhere you see between your car and the house, because if it's not, you know, 60 degrees outside, you may not want to go out to the back 40 of your yard. So I always think these winter flowering things are nice to get where you can see them during the winter. But probably not as a specimen plant, but with some other things that are going to give you other seasons. Flower on Prunus incisa ranges from white to pink. This particular form has mostly white flowers. Some of them have a pink blush. Some of them are fully pink on here. So a little bit of mixing of the flower color on here, which is kind of nice. But easy to grow. The more sun you give it, the more flowers you'll get. But other than that, it's pretty easy and very hardy, very hardy.
Does the fragrance ever waft?
Does the fragrance ever waft? No, this is a pretty lightly fragrant plant. I can just get a little bit of it. I don't know if that's just me. When you get those warm, sunny days, or even it's even less about being warm, but sunny, you tend to get more fragrance out of these than on overcast days like this. But people are welcome to come up and take a sniff and tell me what they think of it.
Is this a mature species of this? Is that as big as it gets?
This is mature. You know, over time it'll get larger, but yeah, I mean this is a mature size on it, pretty much. Getting anything? A little bit.
So I see that it looks like it's maybe suckered a little bit. I mean, I'll put out sprouts besides what looks like the original.
Yeah.
If you wanted to prune it, would you just like cut out the older ones?
Yeah, the question was about pruning it. If you wanted to prune it, you can. This tends to grow as a multi-stem shrub. It does. I wouldn't really call it suckering, but you get multiple stems coming up, and they can be a little bit away from the tree. So, kind of like suckering, I guess. And yeah, you could take those out. You could also just come in and cut back some of the taller shoots. It's not quite like a red twig dogwood where it's very obvious where to cut, but you could come in there and take out some of the older, thicker things and keep it rejuvenated that way. Or you could come in and take out some of the thinner things and open it up a little bit and get a little bit more of a tree form, like a small tree down there, and keep the top in a little bit so that it's you have more of a tree form and a little more light coming through and garden underneath it as well.
would you say that lives?
Did I put it on there? Oh, this one we didn't know, don't quite know when it's planted. I believe it was planted in, looking at our records, I think 2005, 2006. Not sure what size. We just don't have the records on this. It was a little confused. Probably, 3-gallon plant. Good question about the Prunus incisa was, do the flowers drop off after a hard freeze? And after a real hard freeze, they will, but it'll go through a, like if we drop down below freezing overnight, it's typically fine like that. When when we go for an extended period where it's very cold, yeah, they'll turn brown, they'll drop, but since it doesn't put out every flower at once, it's still got a whole nother set of flowers to come out. So it could lose all those flowers and look basically like that again.
Do they make essential oils from this? Sometimes it's called lavandula, and it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that with this plant. Okay, the next one on the list is this lavender, Lavandula pedunculata subspecies lusitanica. There are a couple of different subspecies of Lavandula pedunculata. They're all kind of Spanish, although sometimes you hear it called French lavender, but it's a Spanish lavender. This lusitanica comes from kind of southwestern Spain into Portugal. There's one from kind of northwestern Spain into Portugal, and one kind of in between. This has slightly narrower foliage than others, but it's one of those plants that if it didn't come with a name, the subspecies on there, we would have called it Lavandula pedunculata, and probably nobody would be able to tell what subspecies it is because they're very, very similar. It's another one of those evergreen subshrubs. Very few lavenders really do well in our area. They don't like the humidity. They like a Mediterranean climate where they're from, sunny and dry and low humidity. But this one is one. This and Lavandula sticus are the two that tend to do fairly well for us. It'll stay low, usually about 24 inches tall by about 36 inches wide. It gets the flowers on there, little kind of compact spikes, and it'll keep flowering over an extended period. But the flower petals are just like these little, they're sometimes described as little skinny butterfly wings or rabbit ears at the top, but kind of nice. The foliage is really what's fragrant, not the flowers. The leaves, a lot of essential oils in them, to go to your question, and it is used in a lot of in the ways lavenders are used. Now, typically the lavender that's used, lavender soaps and those kind of things, is Lavandula angustifolia, but this one is also used for a lot of soaps and essential oils and those kind of things as well. It wants full sun, it wants a well-drained soil. Those are essential, but even more so, as important as that is what you have underneath it. It detests having organic mulches. So I've seen people put it in these sunny, well-drained spots, and then they mulch it like they do the rest of their garden with wood chips or with nothing, with just bare soil or leaves like we do, and the plants rot. When the rain hits it, it splashes that organic matter up on there. You have fungal problems. So you're much better off. We use a lot of this type of mulch here, the stone mulch out in this area with a lot of these Mediterranean type plants. But even if you have the rest of your garden mulch, if underneath your lavenders you just put some kind of stone mulch, or I used to garden at the coast and we would do oyster shells under there or something along those lines, it will help your plants immensely. Often questions about pruning. You prune out the dead stuff. It is a Mediterranean plant. You will get some dead things in here, and then you can trim it back. I usually like to do it right after it finishes flowering. Just trim it back then to keep it tidy.
Have you trimmed that already?
No, this has not been trimmed. When I say that how you should trim it, I talk about it. We sometimes get to that kind of thing, but often not.
What about, I have one against a pine tree or right next to a pine tree. Is that good or bad?
Right next to a pine tree.
But it does get a lot of sun.
If it gets a lot of sun, yeah, that's great. It's that pine tree is going to be taking up the excess moisture. It's evergreen, so it's going to be taking up some of the moisture during the winter when it's warm enough for it to do that. So yeah, I mean that's a very good spot for it. Other questions? Thoughts? Comments?
Do you have many Hebes here, or is this the only one?
Question about Hebes. We have planted a lot of Hebes over the past year. We got a whole collection in to evaluate them, and we have very few Hebes now.
I hardly ever see one.
Well, Hebes, there are two types of Hebes. There are those that are fairly heat and relatively humidity tolerant, and they are not cold tolerant at all. And then there are the cold tolerant ones, which will not abide any heat and humidity. So there are very few that cross the ways. This one has been okay so far. Made it through our summer, has not been out here for a winter yet, but that is typically a fairly hardy form. So I think we may be okay. There's another one, Oratio Beauty, that we have out that's doing very well. It's in flower, some of the ones we have right now. And it's been doing pretty well, and we'll see. It made it through the summer. That's the first step, so we'll see how it does during the winter. Made it through last winter, but that doesn't count because there wasn't a winter last winter.
Thank you.
All right, I saw a lot of people going by as they came up, getting a whiff of this. It's Cupressus arizonica. I've talked about it before. This is one called Sapphire Skies, and there are quite a few out there. Silver Smoke, Carolina Sapphire, several of them. Out of all that I've grown, I think Sapphire Skies has been the best. It keeps a relatively tight shape, has the incredible blue foliage, you can see here, and is the most fragrant. It is probably the most fragrant conifer that we have out here. Just really incredible. It's got that kind of a tangerine smell that you often get with firs, kind of the cross between pine and citrus, which I think is very, very nice. Makes an upright tree. In the garden, typically about 30, 40 feet tall, but it can grow quite a bit larger than that. If you limb it up like we've had to, because it started encroaching on the stairways a little too much, you get this beautiful bark that's under there, kind of reddish exfoliating bark. It is very, very resinous. You know, if you touch it, you will get sap and resins all over you. Probably not the best plant to plant over your driveway if you're going to park your car under there. But it is good for making a quick screen. It does go up very quickly. Where they grow a lot in the Rocky Mountains and west, and you get some pretty extreme fluctuations in temperature, extreme heat during the summer, extreme cold during the winter, so it really is tolerant of quite a bit of temperature variation. They also tend to grow in rockier areas, and that kind of anchors their roots in. And the way the root system they're designed to kind of exploit these crevices and really hold on tight. In our nice loose soils and even our heavy clay soils, they don't always have enough to anchor them. So if they're out in real windy spots, you can get, when they get large and start getting a big sail on there, you know, all that surface area, you can have problems with some wind throw in really high wind areas, which is a problem because people plant them as screens and hedges and windbreaks, and then they blow over. They grow really great, and then they get big and blow over. So you do have to be careful about that, sighting them carefully. If you have just one, they tend to let wind go around them enough to not do that. But, they want lots of sun, prefer well-drained soil, very, very drought tolerant, so they're good for slopes and that kind of thing. Questions?
Are there any dwarf cultivars of Arizona?
Are there any dwarf cultivars? There are a few, and I can't think of the names right offhand, but they're hard. They're hard to find. Now, I'm not sure why, because it propagates easily.
Yeah. So what's the fruiting body on here now?
Okay, what you're seeing here, these little guys are the male flowers. The male strobili, they call them on here. Those are the male flowers on the tips.
A lot of them.
Other questions?
So are there female flowers?
There are female flowers. Typically, on most conifers, the female flowers will be up higher, and that helps to ensure cross-pollination. The wind kind of blows the pollen up. These are not open yet. They're not ready to open. They won't open up. I don't think this goes until the spring, so the female flowers are probably still developing. got a Magnolia on the list. This is actually a little bit earlier. Typically it flowers more around the first of the year. It's a little early this year. Doesn't take much chilling to get this thing going. Magnolia Cavalieri. This was formerly one of the plants in Magnolia Cavalieri, but they lumped them all into Magnolia. Although the Chinese botanists are trying to get them to split it all out, and I think the last iteration I saw from the Chinese botanists, they had no Magnolia at all. Everything was in a different genus. It's always fun. Keeps our label engravers busy. Magnolia Cavalieri. This is one of the evergreen Asian magnolias. Makes a large tree in gardens. You usually see them, you can see them 30, 40 feet tall, but they grow much larger. They can grow be very, very large trees with huge trunks, 50, 60 feet tall. Really make nice shade trees when they do that. Although as younger plants, they're very, tend to be very restrained in their size, so good for planting out in the yard. Like I said, evergreen, nice, pretty good sized leaves. Got a little bit silvery on the back, very thick textured, but not like southern magnolia. You know, these fall and they actually do break down, and you can rake them and walk on them and grow things under them, like our native southern magnolias. Flowers in the winter. There's the question about the Prunus incisa, about how it holds up to a freeze. The Prunus incisa holds up well. The Magnolia, not so much, which was why I really wanted to get this on the tour today, because if we get a freeze, the flowers will all turn brown. All the flowers that are open, and even these ones like this that are starting to open and have white coming out, that white part will turn brown. It'll still open up, but you'll have brown all over around the white. So we really like that. We're really getting to enjoy this. It's been beautiful. So you kind of hit it at the ideal time, and you can see it's been flowering for a while. We've got flower petals all over the ground. Fragrance, it's variable in this species. Like a lot of the evergreen magnolias, some will be pretty fragrant, some will not be. If you've ever been around seed-grown Magnolia figo or Michelia figo, the banana shrub, which is related to this but with much smaller flowers, the ones that are fragrant, when they're fragrant, are just magical. They're fruity and just sweet and just deliciously fragrant. And then other plants not fragrant at all, or even different times. You know, they seem to be, when they're fragrant, they're great, but then they kind of go past that. So same thing with this. It can be fragrant. It's not always, and it is variable. I've smelled some that were really very nice that I could actually smell. And as Charlie mentioned with this one, this one's not so much. Hit it on the right day, it's fragrant, but not all the time. Questions about this? Other magnolias? Available. Specialty nurseries, yeah. I know Camellia Forest has had this. I don't know if they still do, but they have had it in the past. Other
It must
questions?
be pretty tough because we put all this paving around it.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Comment was, it must be pretty tough because we built all this paving around it, and this has been very resilient. Often magnolias do not like root disturbance at all, and this has been pretty good. The one time, if you're gonna mess with magnolias, do it in the early spring. That's the best time to mess with them. If you're gonna transplant them, if you're gonna move them, if you're gonna dig around the roots, that's the best time. We knew what we were doing some work over here, so we tried to take that into account, but it has actually tolerated a lot of disturbance to its roots pretty well, which is good because we'd have a big hole here if this disappeared.
The lab house was built around it.
Right, yeah, since we built the lap house around these two magnolias, they've held up pretty well. Whew. Okay, another one of these Mediterranean subshrubs. Not everybody's cup of tea, the fragrance on there. Like I said, I have a terrible sense of smell, so it's kind of nice to me, but I've never been accused of having good taste.
Really?
So Santolina Kymenanthus. little shrub. Really nice silvery blue foliage. If you look at the leaves, they're kind of a funky shape. They're not really pinnate. They're little odd things. This is another one of those plants in the daisy family. Makes a nice little tight mound. Gets these clusters. You see the old flowers right here of little yellow buttons across the top. Really showy when it's in flower. It's gorgeous. Those bright gold over the silvery blue are very, very nice. Another one of those plants that wants lots of sun and well-drained soil. So if you have a kind of a dry spot, good for deer repellents and other critters. They don't like a lot of these Mediterranean plants, these aromatic plants with a lot of essential oils. So you can, I know people who line flower beds with them and try to use them to discourage the deer from at least feeding on the other plants that they do like. Putting them around vegetable gardens can be good for discouraging rabbits and other rodent type critters from getting in there. Well, it's not proof against them, but it will help, which makes it nice. Foliage is very aromatic as you got that around. Some people like it, some people don't like it, but it's used in all kinds of different things. Used in soaps. It's used in essential oils and all kinds of stuff. I'll probably put a list in here. Insect repellents, put in your closet and repel insects, but it's also used in perfumes as well. So it's a little nicer than mothballs maybe. But pretty easy plant. Going back to the question about pruning you usually get, again, after it flowers, instead of letting them all die on the plant, if you cut those back and just trim the whole plant back, it really helps keep them alive. If you don't do that, they'll kind of get larger and larger. You'll get kind of this thinner and thinner layer of green on the outside of dead branches in there, and it'll start to break apart a little bit. They can be short-lived unless they're in very, very lean soils. So if you keep them trimmed back, they'll last a whole lot longer. Okay, this is another cherry. I wanted to get another cherry in here, a more of a tree-type flowering cherry. This is one that has no name, poor plant with no name. It was bred at the U.S. National Arboretum by Margaret Pooler, I believe. It's a cross between an old form of roses of Prunus suburtilla, one called Autumnalis rosea, and Prunus campanulata, which is a Taiwanese cherry that's very, very fragrant. And that's where it gets this color from. This real deep color comes from the Prunus campanulata, and kind of that flower shape as well. And then gets a kind of a heavier flowering, twiggier form from the Prunus suburtilla. It really makes for a nice plant. Not sure why it was never named and released, because we certainly think it's very nice. Again, you can see there's lots of flower buds that haven't even opened up yet. When this gets going, it really gets covered in flowers. Very, very freeze resistant. It'll hold up to quite a bit of cold before it starts showing any damage. The fragrance, we're not getting much of a fragrance now. When I was out this morning, I could really get a pretty strong fragrance from it. And it's kind of got that spicy, sweet fragrance that you get from Prunus Moomay, which we'll look at later. Makes a small tree, usually 15 to 20, 25 feet tall. Real fine twiggy habit. Kind of nice bark. I've heard people say that the bark is really nice on here, but I don't know. Not one you're going to be able to find in most in any garden centers because it's never been named. Every once in a while, we'll send a note to the powers that be at the National Arboretum and say, hey, why don't you put a name on this plant so we can propagate it and give it to people because we do like it. And occasionally we do propagate this and give a few away. So you never know. You may see this at some point from
Propagate by cuttings?
Yeah, you can propagate this from cuttings. It's a hybrid, so seed won't be true. But it can be grafted or it can be propagated from cuttings.
Is there any way to stop that root-type growth around the base?
Any way to stop the suckering from the base?
one that does the same thing as Raspberry.
I know there are some chemical products can be used. I've never used them much, and I don't know about other things. Ted, do you have?
Mainly hydrocide. Tree hold is one. There's two or three. They work. Basically, you prune and then you spray the basic shoots in there.
Is there, if you have trees where this is a problem, is there a pruning time that's better than others?
If you can stand it, midsummer would be better than spring because if you prune them out in spring, basically all the energy is not allocated to shoots, and so it just means that you're going to get more. It's going to ensure that you get to do it again.
Okay.
And so midsummer is better. Things that water sprout or throw shoots, real bad. Crab apples, which we don't have many of, but they're real bad for it. Summer pruning's better on that because then you go through a cycle where the energy is already allocated.
Okay. There you go.
So easy from cuttings?
Relatively easy from cuttings. Tree prunus can be a little difficult and they're slow. You know, that's why a lot of these are grafted, because when you graft them, you get much quicker growth out of it and get more of a tree. But yeah, I know we've done this from cuttings and get pretty high percentages from late May, early June cuttings.
So generally smaller than Prunus Moomay?
Yeah, smaller than Prunus Moomay and tends to have a smaller head. So Prunus Moomay can go out pretty far pretty quickly. This tends to have a smaller head. Okay, couldn't be difficult to do a winter list without winter fragrance without Mahonia. The various Mahonia flower from the typical ones that we grow anyway. Flower from fall into all the way through till late winter, early spring. And there are a lot of different forms out there, different species, different hybrids. One you see a lot is Mahonia ex media. That's a hybrid between Mahonia japonica and Mahonia lamarifolia. Mahonia japonica is one that has really nice fragrance. This Buckland is one that is a little more unusual in the trade. You see a little bit more of ones like Arthur Menzies and Hope and Charity and Winter Sun and some different ones, but I really like Buckland. When it flowers, has very long flower spikes in big clusters. It can be 24 inches across with those long flower spikes of individual yellow flowers. After it finishes flowering, you'll get blue-black fruits on the tops, which are very nice. When I first learned Mahonias when I was learning plant ID and all those, I was taught that you try to keep them small, that you cut back the cane growth, so you cut them back regularly when they're young to keep them bushy and low. And that's kind of if you want them as a foundation plant, you can do that. And I never really found them great plants that way. They're kind of, these long leaves, which are spiny, you're kind of coarse that way. And then I started seeing them grown up where they weren't pruned or they were thinned out, but allowed to grow up. And they seem to me much more effective as a large upright shrub than trying to have them as a foundation planting. We got plenty of plants that'll stay small and evergreen and low. Something this coarse in terms of stems and leaves, just I don't think is good. So these you'll see through here, some of them are larger than others, and I really think these ones that are allowed to grow up and show this nice bark are actually very effective. Grow in sun or shade. They're pretty drought tolerant, pretty tough. I think great landscape plants if they're used correctly. Questions or thoughts?
Is there a problem with seeding?
Is there a problem with them seeding?
Because they've been put on invasive lists, some of the Mahonias.
Yes, some of the Mahonias in some places have been put on some invasive lists. I have not seen much of a problem here in North Carolina. I don't know, somebody may have some other opinions on that. Don't think they're really bad here. In some areas they can be pretty difficult. Even where they do seed, they don't seem to outcompete natives very much. They intermingle, they're definitely there, they're naturalized, but they don't really outcompete, so they're not forcing other plants out of the ecosystem so much, for what that's worth. worth more to some people than others.
In 1971, I had one plant on my property. I had a little city lot, and I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds I've had. But they did survive that 1 week of -9-degree weather we had here in '85.
Oh yeah, they're hardy.
Kill 'em.
They're hardy, but keep in mind there's a difference between them. They will seed some, but there's a difference between being invasive and seeding around the garden too. Invasive means moving out to the wild and depending on your definition, displacing other plants. But yeah, they're definitely tough. Some of the media, depending on how much Mahonia japonica is a little more tender. So the more Mahonia japonica you have in there, the more tender they'll tend to be. Other ones, there are a lot of different Mahonias out there. They often get all lumped together. Some of the other forms can be a little more aggressive in terms of seeding.
Did you say they grow equally well in both sun and shade?
Yeah, they'll do very well in shade. They're gonna grow a little faster. They're gonna flower a little heavier in sun, but yeah, they do pretty well in shade. Now they will, if they're kind of in a spot where they're getting some shade and there's sun, they will tend to grow, and with this long cane-like growth, you can get them really kind of laying down if there's a way they can grow into sun. But if they kind of have an even, dappled shade canopy, they'll grow upright, and you'll get these spots of gold in there when they flower in the shade.
We'll see.
This is a Himalayan sweetbox, Sarcococa hookeriana variety digna. One called Western Hills. I think the Western Hills really, it either refers to Western Hills Nursery, which is a nursery in the UK, or it refers to the area where it was collected, because somebody who collected quite a bit of Sarcococa collected in what he termed the Western Hills in Asia. And so I'm not sure, I've never been able to track that down. Give the train a second. All right, makes a nice little evergreen kind of suckering shrub. Over time it will spread and become a bigger and bigger clump as it suckers a bit. This particular species has fairly long, narrow foliage, real deep green, comes out lighter green, goes darker. Flowers during the winter, and it gets the name sweet box because of the sweet fragrance from the flowers. They're kind of a greenish white. They're not overly showy. Even when this thing's in full bloom, it's marginally showy at best, but the fragrance is very, very nice, and it's one of those fragrances that kind of wafts on in the air, so you can smell it from far away. By next summer, it'll usually start making some red fruits that'll turn black. It can be really, when it's covered in fruit, it can be very showy. Plants can range from male to female to somewhere in between. So sometimes these plants they'll be self-fruitful. Other times you really need a male and a female to form fruits. This one I don't recall seeing a lot of fruits on. I don't know if anybody has noticed. Do they have a few fruits?
Yeah, there's one.
Okay, yeah, got a little bit of fruit in here. There's one little red one there. Must have been from an early flower. So this is at least is either female or has some mixed flowers. Sweetbox will grow in shade. It'll grow in sun. Really, with some shade, it looks better. It tends to stay deeper green. You get it out in full sun, it'll often yellow out a bit. Won't be quite as attractive. Great for cut stems. If you want green cut stems, it's very good for that. You can cut it when it's flowering and bring that fragrance inside, but the flowers will drop pretty quickly, but those stems will last in water for a long, long time. Drought tolerant once it's established. Just a real nice, easy kind of a workhorse type plant, but I think a real graceful look and that nice fragrance is very good.
It really does have a good fragrance. No nose person.
Right, yes. I agree. For someone who can't smell very, but yes, it does.
To have male and female, do you have to have from the same, or can it be one of the other varieties?
Same species. It can be like this is variety. This is Sarcococa hookeriana. You'd want another Sarcococa hookeriana, but it could be variety humilis and variety digna. They can pollinate each other. the very few places sell them by male and female. That's very difficult to find. But a lot of the ones that are sold will pollinate themselves, or else have parthenocarpic fruit that doesn't need to be pollinated. Other questions?
We usually have them at the
High alpha plant sales, yes. Yeah. So it's just a really good plant. And there are shorter forms. The Sarcococa hookeriana variety humilis is a lower growing plant, more like a ground cover. Next plant is Kymenanthus praecox, or winter sweet, and people love this plant. It's one of those few plants that actually winds up on my list. That I don't say is one of my favorites, but everybody loves it so much I thought I'd talk about it. Kymenanthus praecox. This is a form called luteus. This is a kind of a medium to coarse, upright, open, large shrub. Kind of nondescript foliage looking, but if you feel it, you could probably hand this to me. I could probably tell you it was Kymenanthus without even seeing it, just because it's like sandpaper. It's kind of like shark skin. It's rough in one direction and smooth in the other. Can turn a nice yellow in the fall. You can see down here, see the foliage on it that's still here. Why you really grow this is for the flowers, though. We pass them around. You can see the flowers here amongst the leaves. Kind of these almost translucent, waxy gold flowers with a really nice fragrance. It really does have a great fragrance. Luteus, or sometimes known as concolor, you probably see it more often as concolor, but the real name is luteus, is a little bit nicer than the species. You can kind of see the species back there and through the middle, maybe some of y'all. Kind of got a pale yellow flower as opposed to this gold. The gold is much nicer. It's just starting to flower. It's gonna get a lot more flower buds on there. Kind of a funky fruit. Here we go. The fruit. I've had I don't know how many people bring in the fruits from these things and say, I've got bugs on my tree, or send me pictures. What are they? But they are the fruits. Sometimes with a spider in the fruit. With all these seeds inside. If you scarify the seed, just scrape them. They'll pop right out. But if you sow them without scarifying them, they often won't come up at all. It is grown. I said the Prunus incisa. It's kind of nondescript when it's not in flower. This is a plant which nondescript is generous to it when it's not in flower. It really is a great plant for tucking in around other things, because its fragrance does really float on the breeze, so you really can smell it when it's in flower, and they see it when it's in flower, but then have other things that'll take your eye away when it's not. It is not a specimen plant when it is not in flower. Have I sold this plant? Have I been too rough on the plant? The fragrance is amazing, and I know very good plant people that this is one of their all-time favorite plants because the fragrance is so nice. So I have a terrible sense of smell, so perhaps that's why I'm not quite as keen on it. But I'm always giving a hard time about saying this is one of my favorite plants. This one's not one of my favorite plants.
So you said it won the AGM. What is AGM?
The Award of Garden Merit. Yeah, that's right. I wanted to put that in there because to offset my prejudice against this plant. It did win the Award of Garden Merit. That's one of the high honors that the Royal Horticultural Society bestows on very good garden plants. And it was specifically this luteus, not the species, but luteus with the darker gold flowers, which the species, in my mind, when it flowers, it's still fragrant. It's wonderfully fragrant, but the flowers aren't even very pretty. They look like they've been frosted. Well, now this one's luteus. Yeah, it's got gold flowers. Y'all wait right here.
No, it's not. But it's wonderful smell.
I mean, come on. That is not that pretty. Side by side. Yeah.
Looks kind of dirty even.
Yeah. Nope. So,
What do you think of its cousin there?
yeah, there's right beside it. This evergreen plant is an evergreen Kymenanthus, which is, I think it's a beautiful plant. Beautiful, really graceful texture. Flowers doesn't flower during the winter, and the flowers are white. And they're kind of nice. They're held right on top of the leaves. You know, not one of those 50-mile-per-hour plants that you drive by and make you hit the brakes, but walking by it, really beautiful. Unfortunately, it stinks. So if we could get the fragrance from this onto that, it would be pretty incredible. Then it would be one of my favorites. Yeah. All right. Any more questions or comments? Anybody want to speak in defense of this poor plant?
Who has one?
A lot of people. I'm telling you, some of plant people I really respect. This is one of their all-time favorite plants. So
But it's
I just don't
ugly.
have a good sense of smell.
It's ugly.
It is an ugly plant. Got winter honeysuckle, Linicera fragrantissima. This is one of the shrubby honeysuckles. For people who grew up in the South and all they know about honeysuckle is our native vining honeysuckle and the Japanese honeysuckles that are all vines. You know, sometimes this comes as a great departure. For those of you who grew up farther north or in the Midwest, y'all know shrub honeysuckles because they're grown everywhere out there. They can be a little bit invasive. Linicera fragrantissima is a large shrub. It can become a big mound, 10 feet tall and 15 feet wide probably. You can whack them back. You can pretty much do whatever you want to them. Once they're established, they're pretty difficult to kill. It is another one of those nondescript when not in flower. It's actually, even when it's in flower, it's not terribly showy, but it's a little neater than the Kymenanthus, just saying. But the flowers are incredibly fragrant. It's not an issue with it being invasive around here like it can be farther north, but this is one you probably can all smell it right now. Very sweet fragrance. There's one little open flower on there. You can probably smell it. Just getting started to flower, but it'll continue to flower off and on through most of the winter. It's very, very fragrant. No?
I really don't have much of a nose.
It's a little cold out.
Very tough, like sun. It'll flower best in sun. It'll probably grow in heavy shade because it'll grow just about anywhere. Very, very drought tolerant. Very easy. You can see it's still looking pretty evergreen, but it'll lose most of its leaves. You go up farther north and it would have lost its leaves by now. But this will drop its leaves over time. We've got a couple of different Liniceras in here. We got some hybrids, Prunus around the corner that are very similar, very fragrant flowers. I picked this one because this one actually had flowers open on it. But a good workhorse type plant. If you're really into fragrance in the garden, it's a really good plant to have because you do get fragrance. And this is one that I will often smell, 20, 30, 40 yards away when it's in flower. I can tell that it's flowering. So it's kind of nice during the winter. You should every time you come for a walk in the winter, come around this corner because we've got this one and we've got these couple other ones around the corner. And it's really very fragrant coming around too. Questions about it?
I saw it turn up one time into a small tree.
Yeah, it may be nice that way. If its comment was it was seen pruned up into kind of a small tree. If you don't do that, it makes kind of a big haystack and it suckers some. You can see, if you look down here where the branches hit the ground, it can sucker, and so it kind of creeps along. If you limit up, one, you keep it from looking like a big haystack. It looks a little tidier that way. Two, you can garden under it. And three, you keep it from suckering and going. Because, it's a type of plant that you like, that's a nice plant, it's a nice plant. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, when did I get this 15-foot wide mass of stems? And then you got to try and deal with it, and that's a pain. So pruning it up is probably a great way to deal with it.
Trying to root it.
Or prune it low. And speaking of that, anything that will sucker like that, pretty easy from cutting. So we passed a couple other Prunus Moomay that were starting to open. This one's buds are just swelling on it. I thought we were going to have them open when I decided to do this plant, but it didn't quite. But I left, keep it on the list because we couldn't have a winter fragrance list without Prunus Moomay. It's one of JC's favorite plants, one he promoted quite a bit. Prunus Moomay is a medium-sized flowering tree. When people ask me, I usually say about 35 feet tall and as wide. They can get larger. There are smaller ones. Prunus Moomay flower during the winter. Starting around now, once it gets cold, beginning of December, we start getting them to flower, and they, depending on the variety, will keep flowering most of the way through February, depending on variety. Flowers are extremely freeze resistant. I've probably got 50 pictures of Prunus Moomay flowers with snow on them and ice around the flowers, and they look just fine. They open their flowers over a successive period, so even if they get frozen, which is rare, they'll still flush back out another set. Flowers, it's often described as having a clove-like fragrance, kind of a spicy, sweet fragrance. Really a nice fragrance, and another one that the fragrance kind of drifts and wafts all through the air. The one kick against it is it's a fairly nondescript during the growing season. It's doesn't have a lot that separates it. It's easy to identify because the young stems are green, and I've heard people try and talk about that like it's a real ornamental feature, but I'd venture to say when this is covered in leaves, green stems, brown stems, you probably don't care that much. And when they get mature, you don't have a whole lot of that green new growth anyway. But they do have nice bark. If you prune them, they can have a nice shape. If you don't prune them, you'll get a lot of this kind of crossing and tangling. They almost look like something that wants to be a shrub that's growing into a tree because the way the branches often cross. So you do need, but if you do some work on them when they're young, you open them up, you get this nice kind of a little bit reddish bark. They're a nice tree, and when they're flowering in the middle of January and they have this incredible fragrance and it floats in from your backyard to the front of your house and everywhere, your strangers will stop and knock on your door and say, what is this plant? Because it really is an amazing plant when it's in flower. This particular one, Rosebud, has pink flowers. They'll open really dark. You can see some of the buds. They'll lighten up as they open up more. But really kind of a neat one. All kinds of different ones. Some with larger flowers, some with smaller flowers, some with double flowers. They're weeping ones, whites, pinks, almost reds on them, contorted ones, lots of different forms. You can get a lot of them at Camellia Forest here locally. They have a great selection, and you can also get ones that are specifically grown for their fruit. You don't see their fruit eaten much in the U.S., but in Japan they love them, ume, and they usually pickle them. They're kind of like little tiny peaches that never really developed. And they're pickled, but we'll have people come here and collect them. We've got a pretty large Asian population in the Triangle. They'll often come here and collect them. My bank, when they're fruiting, they have a couple of Prunus Moomay in front, and I'll often see Asian women there, and they always look furtive about it. When they're here, we're like, please take them. We don't want to clean them up. And they're really good when you eat them. They're pretty good if you like pickled things.
Don't you get a lot of seedlings from some of these?
Some seed quite a bit. There's a big one a big unnamed one in the mixed border that's gorgeous, but it seeds like crazy and it suckers like crazy. So you do want to put them where there won't be a whole lot of disturbance under them if you can. But they are tough, and for a prunus, flowering prunus tree, they're long-lived and pretty tough. A lot of prunus can get a lot of different diseases and things, and while this can get quite a few problems, it's generally a pretty long-lived plant. And when you smell it flowering, it is worth having because it really is magical smelling. Comments?
A man makes wine.
There you go. I have heard of that. Ume wine. You can make wine from. Does he collect your fruits?
Yes, 5-gallon bucket full.
Have you tasted the wine?
Yes, he did bring us some.
How was it? Sweet.
There's other Prunus Moomay up by the building, but some seem more fragrant than others? I think you might have mentioned that before. Is this one fragrant in particular compared to those others?
Is this one fragrant in particular? Not. No. They are all fragrant, but like a lot of these winter fragrant plants, time of day and in their where they are in their flower cycle makes a big difference. I've never come across a Prunus Moomay that wasn't very fragrant, but I've come across it when it wasn't very fragrant right then. So I think that's probably more the issue. But you come out on one of these, when it's really full bloom, you come out on these days where it really warms up in the afternoon and it's sunny, wow. But even when it's cold, they really, this is one that the fragrance really carries, even on a cold day, better than a lot of other ones, a lot of other plants. Other questions or comments? All right, well, I hope y'all walk around the garden a little bit more, enjoy it. There's a lot of things I did not talk about, both fragrance and flowers and other things. We might get a freeze sometime soon, so some of these things in flower may not look so good. Well, enjoy it while you can.
Thanks for the great tour, Mark.
Thank you.